to the cloud. Okay. So for those of you who just joined, have never attended our workshops, as I mentioned previously, from the Division of Postgraduate Studies, and we basically guide new students and returning students on how to actually focus on academic writing. And there's certain aspects, especially if you're a master's student or a first-year PhD student, there's certain things that are required of you despite your lab work or in spite of your lab work. And that is, you have to submit a proposal, and the proposal gets submitted to your faculty, which then gets run through Senate, and they approve your proposal with your memorandum of understanding and your title registration. So in order for you to write a proposal or develop a research proposal, you need to understand two important things first: academic writing and the conventions of academic writing, which we covered previously, and then reviewing your literature, because you're then entering a particular research field. And as a result of that, as a result of that, you need to understand what that field is about. So this is where you start becoming a researcher. And then from there, you develop your research proposal. So that will be coming up on the 21st. I prefer doing them once a month or 2-3 weeks apart, because it gives you time to work as the workshops go along, to start gathering the information and work so that you can make your Senate deadlines. So we'll have a two-part, sorry, I'll correct that, a two-part developing of your research proposal. And then one of the things for most of us is that we're in a laboratory setting. So as a result of that, you need to begin your data collection. And one of the most important, and I just ask you to please, the mic, let me just find, there we go. Okay, let's continue. Please, can I ask you to mute your mic? I did mute you already. Thank you. Okay, and then we will continue with data collection and management. And one of the new things that a lot of new students don't know is that the university is actually going to introduce a research data management plan. So aside from your proposal that you're going to have to submit at Senate, you're also going to have to submit a data management plan. So that's how we guide you through that. So eventually when it comes in and the powers that be sit, we can then begin that process of how do you fill out a data management plan and submit it with your proposal. And then one of the key things that's very, very important, especially if you're in the natural sciences, is quantitative data analysis. If you're doing cell culture, you're running assays, you're doing immunology, and that, you have a very huge quantitative data analysis component. So we'll be guiding you through that in June. And that's just basically to guide you through all the things that are required for you to actually finish your 2 to 3 year master's degree. So the content for today is literature review. So we'll be just touching on everything. If you look at the slides, they're quite wordy. I prefer keeping it wordy so that when you refer back to them or look at the recording, you're able to go back and then understand things. But for those of you who attended the previous one, which was on academic writing, I prefer to do class exercises, well, workshop exercises. So we'll be doing something on how far back you should get your published data and the quickest way. That's one of the things I'm very big on, is how to streamline things and the quickest way, because as students, there's so many things that we need to see to on top of adulting. So as a result of that, you need to understand how to gather your data as quick as possible, gather your information as quick as possible. So I always believe in streamlining it, because who has the time? So we'll be doing that. And we're looking at how do I actually navigate my literature review. I'm looking at critical thinking. This is where I explained to a couple of students that contact me about literature review. This is where you're learning to think outside the box. So what you're doing is you're exploring the knowledge that's available, you're identifying the gaps, and then you're going to actually form your research proposal, which then becomes your thesis introduction. So if you start gathering the information properly from the get-go, it makes it much easier for you when you start writing your thesis, or if you decide to adopt writing as you go along. And then we look at citations. I usually do a whole 20-minute on EndNote, on how do you get EndNote, how do you work EndNote, like a quick thing. But the library does a 2-hour workshop on that. So therefore, I don't feel like there's a need to touch on that. I'll just show you where to download EndNote and why we use EndNote. And then common mistakes. And those common mistakes and checklists are not for me, so I don't need to go through them much. It's for you. So when you start writing a literature review, you look at the mistakes, the common mistakes I've listed, and how do you fit in, or does your literature review align with that? And also a checklist. I think I have one student whose mic is, let me find, this is like really, okay, let me quickly, okay, awesome, sorry about that. I just need to, there's a lot of background because I'm actually in a lab already, so a lot of the equipment is also making a sound. Okay, so let's start. Types of literature review. Now, for us in the natural sciences, we tend to focus on what is known as a narrative traditional literature review. So that has your introduction, your methodology, your body, and your conclusion. And so that is the one that we usually focus on. And that's where we write our first chapter of our thesis, or if you're writing your thesis in publication format, that's usually the introduction section. That's your literature review. But in some cases, if you decide to publish, and this is the thing why students don't understand why literature review becomes important. If you spend a lot of time gathering the information of a literature review correctly, that literature review can be a publication on its own. It can either serve as a critical review, which means I have gathered a whole lot of information on a particular topic. And from that, I've actually identified the gaps, and I'm able to critically analyze what the research out there has done and how it fits into what I'm trying to do. And I've identified weaknesses. That can be published. So that automatically means, and remember, when you're entering academia and you're at postgraduate level, especially for masters moving up, you have to start focusing on a publication mindset. Because at the end of the day, everything usually comes down. And a lot of students even, don't want to continue after masters into a PhD. And you'll find that in some industries, they actually look at your publication record. Even if you have 1 or 2 first author or third or fourth, the ability to work as a team on a particular project. So if you focus on a good literature review, a good chapter 1, that automatically can become a publication. So then we have the critical review, as I mentioned, and then we have what is known as your scoping review. And that's exactly that. What you're doing is that you're mapping the research that's out there and you're looking at key concepts. So we're looking at a particular topic and we're looking at the key concepts in that particular topic. Remember, as I mentioned previously in academic writing, when you belong to a particular research group, whether you're in microbiology, oral microbiology, you're in community health sciences, nursing, social work, virology, whatever you're in, at the end of the day, there's a particular language that you're speaking. So as a result of that, you need to then have the key concepts or the fundamentals of that. And that is where scoping literature review comes into play. And then the other one is the conceptual, which is again, similar to a scoping, but a scope is a map. So then you're actually giving your reader, remember in academic writing, you're always focused on the reader and what they're going to grasp from your particular piece of writing. In a scoping review, I'm mapping out particular key concepts in a particular research field. In a concept, I'm not mapping it. I'm just putting the concepts there. So it's like a framework. So I'm identifying particular concepts. And then the other two that we're very familiar with in health sciences as well is the meta-analysis and the systematic. And the meta-analysis is exactly that. I'm collecting a whole lot of quantitative data. So it's an extremely statistically heavy review looking at treatment and exposure. So if I'm looking at breast cancer and I'm looking at the up or down regulation of a particular gene in breast cancer, there is a cause and effect. So I'm analyzing all the particular quantitative data. So what that means is among female women age 30 to 35, 40 to 45, and so on and so forth in a particular geographical location, I'm looking at the statistical analysis between the groups. That's meta-analysis. And that is slightly different than systematic. Systematic is I'm gathering all the information randomly, okay? I'm gathering all the information and I'm answering a particular question. With meta-analysis, I'm gathering all the quantitative data. So I can say there's a 70% chance, there's a 95% chance because of 300 reviews based on 1,000 clinical trials or so on and so forth. We are able to say with confidence interval that this is going to be the outcome, cause and effect. With systematic, I'm gathering all the empirical data, depending on a particular country or province, and I'm putting it together to see how the data correlates with each other. So you see, there's a slight difference between the two. And then one of the other ones that's very rarely used, but it's also used especially specifically in clinical trials, is that you're giving an unbiased opinion. So that's the Cochrane one. So that's a review where I'm gathering information, but I'm giving an unbiased critical, and this is where critical thinking becomes important. I'm giving an unbiased opinion of what has been published out there. And that's how we have different types. But for us, the natural sciences and the thesis, we're focused on the narrative and traditional. So why do we go through all this process? One, you have to understand what you're doing. So if you join a lab, remember each lab has a principal investigator who has a particular niche field. You are going to have to develop a research proposal. In some cases, some of you are lucky enough to be given a particular thesis title. If you're not given a particular thesis title, you belong to a particular group. So they'll tell you, okay, you are doing viruses, so you are going to do influenza A because the PhD above you or the postdoc is doing influenza A. So you already have a rough idea, but you're still going to have to understand how influenza A virus works and differs from B and C influenza to develop your research proposal. That's the first thing. Secondly, as I've mentioned to students many times, there's often no need to reinvent the wheel. I can guarantee you 90% of the time, the methodology and analysis method that you're going to use, and this becomes very important for quantitative data analysis. It has been done before. There are software tools to help you. It's been done before. You just have to understand it. So you won't understand your methodology. You won't learn how to think outside the box. You won't learn how to follow a particular protocol if you don't understand the methodology. So the quickest way to understand your methodology is via gathering information. Because yes, you can speak to a senior student that has done a particular assay in the laboratory setting. However, for you to really understand that assay, aside from reading the protocol, you need to see the application. Because everyone can follow a recipe, well, most of us. So you can follow a protocol, which is a recipe, but do you understand why, how, and how it fits into your particular methodology? So that's where literature review is needed. And then also, you're going to review your existing literature to show your supervisor, senate, and your examiners that you actually understand. So it's essential for you to discuss what you found. You need to understand what was there before. Does that make sense? So that's why we actually gather so much information and why literature reviews become important. And as I've mentioned, it's a preliminary step for proposal writing, for understanding what you're doing, why you're doing it. And for some of you, especially if you're in the community health sciences who follow the mixed method approach, if you're going to do a mixed method approach, that means you're going to have a qualitative section and you're going to have a quantitative section. For you to understand that, you need to understand what's the preliminary aspect, like how do I begin combining the two aspects of research? And that's where reviewing literature is important. So why do we do it? Again, as I've mentioned, in some cases, especially in the community health sciences, you aren't given a research question. So you might be assigned a supervisor or decide to work with somebody, but they haven't given you a topic. They haven't given you a research question. You do not have an aims and objectives because they want you to begin thinking, what is my research topic? How does it correlate to the existing knowledge? And what question am I trying to ask? Now, you are only going to start thinking about those things, and that's where it becomes very overwhelming for students. You're only going to start thinking about those things if you start reading what's out there and understanding, okay, this is the question I could ask. I see someone asked it on this particular plant, maybe I could do it on this particular plant or look at this particular aspect. And then how does that fit in? Has the study been undertaken before? Now at master's level, it isn't always necessary that you're going to have a novel idea, because master's is exactly that. I'm mastering skills. I'm mastering and refining my knowledge. I'm getting familiar with what's out there in research, and I'm also learning methodologies. So in some cases, it's not going to be novel. However, if you're a PhD and if you're looking to upgrade, it's very, very important that you have a very novel concept from the get-go. And how is it relevant and how does it contribute? So these are the things why we do literature reviews. And they're often boring for students, but there's a quick way to actually gather the information. And then the structure, I'm just going to briefly touch on the structure. I think most of us are familiar with this. So chronological is exactly that. There's an order to it. So there's an introduction, you're defining your topic, a point of view, you're reviewing what's out there. You then have your main body because you're summarizing the existing knowledge that's out there. And then after there's a conclusion. And then in some cases, you might have a particular one where you have to develop, so it's the development of ideas. And again, this depends on what particular faculty you belong to, but also what department and what research group you belong. So it does depend on your supervisor and what particular field that you're in. So the first one is a chronological order of writing. The other one is the development of of ideas. For you to develop ideas, as we know, you need to understand. So you have to have a very good understanding of what you're doing. So before you start, you have to then adjust. So you have to understand, like, what is it? So you're actually grouping them via a theme. So chronological would be the simplest way we do it. So it's very easy to discuss developments that are happening in your particular field. So for example, if you're looking at politics, you're investigating how democracy has evolved over time. That's pretty easy, because then you would go back to when democracy was first invented and then look at it over the years, step by step. If you're developing ideas over time, you might put it via a theme and then compare it. So they'll have particular categories. So that's development of ideas by a theme. And then the other one is the way you need to have a clear decision on how you're going to pick which one. So for us, thankfully, at master's level, we usually follow the first one, which is the traditional, easiest way. So you're given a particular topic, and from that, you're then developing. So most of them show it. I don't think I've shown it yet. It's an upside down pyramid. So you start broad, and then you narrow down. So you start with cancer, then come down to your cancer, your compound, and you come down. It's the same concept in epidemiology studies. You start with a particular group that is suffering from an ailment, a particular population. You're looking at a particular treatment, and then you're looking at an outcome. So it's a very systematic way of doing it. So that is the importance of literature review. You need to understand the research context and how to be undertaking. So where do you start? You start searching. And then you start reading. And one of the things is, it's called academic literacy. You have to read to understand. Unfortunately, gone are the days where we can cram things. Gone are the days where we can just read the abstract. You have to really read to understand. You have to improve your academic literacy. And the only way to do that is to start thinking critically. And then you begin the writing process. So it's a step-by-step. And that's the thing that will come. This is a concept that's going to come up a lot in research context. You have to be systematic. You have to plan, as I mentioned in previous workshop, you have to plan and have a systematic way in which you're going to undertake your writing, your reading, your gathering of information, and explaining yourself. It's unfortunately, we can't wing this. It's quite a long, laborious, step-by-step iterative process. So an overview of how do we do this? You formulate your question. That's a good place to start. I have a title: lung cancer, gold nanoparticle, green synthesis, alpha B receptor, estrogen receptor, ROC1 gene, whatever. That's my research question. I want to see how it affects a particular outcome, cause and effect. And then from there, I have objectives. So I have a main question that I'm asking, and I have objectives. And then I start searching accordingly. And this is the one thing that students need to get comfortable. You have to screen for inclusion. What does that mean? If I start searching for literature, there are going to be thousands and thousands of Google articles that are going to come up on Google Scholar. What I have to have is an inclusion and exclusion criteria. So if I'm interested in cancer, and I have to go, there are about how many cancers in the world? I'm only interested in the history of lung cancer. Do you see how that's my inclusion criteria? I'm only interested in, is a question, okay. In that, so that's my inclusion criteria. Cancer, broad, lung cancer, smoking, or non-smoking, but asbestos exposure. So you see, there's already a very big exclusion criteria. If all smokers are removed from lung cancer patient outcomes, and I'm only looking at asbestos exposure, that already brings down my articles from hundreds and hundreds of thousands down to at least 200 or 100 or 50 or so on. That's manageable. And then you have to look at the primary studies and then extract the data, analyze the data, and put it all together to tell a story. But in addition to that, I'm telling a story, but I'm seeing how my story fits in. Okay, so that breaks it down in a simpler way. So how do you write? You have to start thinking critically. So for the scientific one, problem, the topic, identify, and critically analyze. And this is the very, very important thing. We're evaluating, so therefore you have to look at the research that's out there, and does it actually have a significant contribution? And in addition to that, have you able to read the literature that's out there and be objective and criticize it? And that's the 5 C's that we'll get to. So that's critical analysis. Okay, so we can read this in your own time. I mean, these are just fancy words: objectivity, persuasiveness, and value. But I'm interested in this. Okay, so it's a simpler. This is the key thing when you start writing and academic writing and doing your research and why you're doing a master's and so on. Yes, we all want to upskill. We all want to move up an NQF level, but that's not only the process. You have to understand. And that's becoming more and more important if you decide to stay in academia, or if you decide to leave academia and go out into industry. You have to have critical thinking. So that's the thing. When you read articles, there has to be a systematic investigation in how you're going to gather the articles. Okay, so that's the importance of circumventing the critical mind. So I'll come back to this. This is where critical thinking becomes important. You're moving from description to analysis. Remember when we were in undergrad and honors, it was just mini thesis, assessments, describe what happened. This is what happened, done. Can I move? Can I get my CAM? Can I get my degree? And can I move on? We're moving out of that to analyzing. So I have to have academic literacy. I have to read to understand so that I can describe it, I can criticize it, I can deconstruct it, and then I can show the limitations of the study and how my study fits in. And to start thinking of that at master's level becomes very important, so that when you move up to PhD level, you're already able to think outside the box. And that is what is known as critical appraisal. So it's a process where we're systematically examining research and you're going to judge this article. So you're looking at this particular article, judge, is it a credible article? Is there relevance to my study? Because nobody has time to be reading random articles. I mean, there are people who do that for fun, and that's okay. But with relation to our research, we're only interested in what we are doing. So you have to look at the summary of the article. So a good place to start is your abstract, the key findings, and methodologies. Like I said before, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. There's absolutely no need to reinvent the wheel, because at the end of the day, you need to look at the methodology that you're planning on using in your laboratory setting, how it's been done before, how you can fix it and adapt it, and how it relates to your study. But there's always a key thing to remember is work ethics, so an accurate reference point. So one of the things also that's commonly used, especially if you're doing epidemiology, you're doing clinical studies, you have ethics, you are working with patient samples, is what is known as the PCOT method. Okay, so in previous, I used to go in depth with this, but there's no need because I'm looking at a broad way in which you're doing literature reviewing. So PCOT method is population, intervention, comparator, outcome, and time. Okay, so what is my population group? I'm looking at a particular, either I'm looking at a particular study, skin cancer in males between the ages of 40 to 45. That's my population. Intervention, I'm looking at a particular sunscreen. I'm trying to compare SPF 15 to 50. That's the intervention. And will it result into a decreased rate in skin cancer or late stage melanoma? I'm going to compare it to people in that particular population. I'm going to compare it between racial groups of people who have more melanin, less melanin. So I'm comparing. And then I'm looking at the outcome. What are the chances? So do you see how they get all the statistics of there's a 10% chance of you having a skin cancer if you're this, that? That's how we get those ideas. We're looking at the outcome over a period of 10-year exposure. Do you see? So that's the PCOT method. So when you look at an article, it's always good to just write that down and see. Population, male. I'm also doing a study on male between the ages of 40 to 45. Intervention, late stage melanoma. I'm looking at early stage melanoma, but late stage can also be included. Great, that's the intervention. Comparator, they're looking at SPF 13, 15, but I'm looking at a particular natural sunscreen. I can now compare mine with theirs. Outcome, do they both improve your skin barrier? Do they result in skin cancer, late, middle stage melanoma or not over a period of 5 years? Let's compare. So that's a very good, and one of the key things I always tell students is to write. So you write notes on the article on the side. You write particular notes on articles. So if you gather at least 10 or 20, you will have a very good building block and we'll get to winging your first draft. And that's how you're able to gather the information. So again, this all forms the part of academic writing. So we did this last week where we looked at 2 weeks ago, the C's. I'm comparing, I'm critiquing, I'm connecting, I'm constructing, checking, so on and so forth. So what we're aiming for, as I mentioned previously, you're tackling one key point at a time. And this is why in your literature review, subheadings become very important. But it's very easy to have subheadings because it makes it easier for you to write. If you have subheadings, you're going to write a paragraph at a time. So you can even write a paragraph, if you have 12, 14, 15 subheadings that all have a clear logical flow of your argument, they're clear and cohesive. So they all flow within each other. If you have 15 subheadings and you break them down into weekly, once a week, you can sit and write a paragraph on that subheading that tackles one key point. In a month, you will have at least half of that done. So you see, it's a long process in which you're systematically communicating your point of view. So now we get to where do we start? So that's literature searching. So the library does this in depth. I would advise people to attend all the library workshops on how to do searches. It does help. There's no need to use Google. Yes, we use Google for everything. But when you're starting to look for articles, PubMed helps, Google Scholar helps, and there are others. But today we'll do an example on PubMed and how easy it is to find the research. So the first thing I'm gathering. I belong to the virology lab. We focus on influenza. I need to start searching on influenza A. So that's essential. You need to search. And then you find your articles, and then you're able from there to gather the particular. So how do you do that? What is the quickest way to do it? So we are going to focus on PubMed, but these are all the ones that we use. And the university does have access to all of this. If there's a particular article, and this is why it's important to attend the library workshops, if there's a particular article that you would like, and it's paid to view or so on and so forth, the librarian, so there's a science librarian, there's a natural science librarian, there's a community health science librarian, you find them on the library website, you contact them, they get you the article. Okay, and that's how you're able to. But the university does have access to PubMed, Google Scholar, Science Direct, Web of Science, and NCBI and Medline. So that's more than enough to get all the articles that you need. Okay, so before we get to the workshop on PubMed, I'm just going to quickly go through how do we actually gather. So how do you do that? Firstly, I have a topic. Okay, so you can actually work along side this. So I'm going to slow down a bit because most of the stuff you can read from the slides. So now I have a keyword. So while you're sitting there, grab a pen and paper and let's come up with your research idea. So all of you belong to a particular group. So we can work this. So I have a research idea. Let's do gold nanoparticles. Okay, so that's my research idea, gold nanoparticles. I now need to look for articles that are part of gold nanoparticles, but I need to have clear inclusion and exclusion criteria. So write your research idea down. So mine is, my research idea is gold nanoparticles, and come up with keywords that are your inclusion and exclusion criteria. So in my case, I want to look at gold nanoparticles in lung cancer. Sorry, actually, no. Let's change that to colorectal. Done that one. Yeah. So now I already have an inclusion criteria. Okay. So already have inclusion criteria, gold nanoparticles, colorectal cancer. So those already brings me down from cancer to that. Those are my two keywords. Okay. I'm looking at a particular plant synthesized. So that would be green. So there's already 5 keywords. So you see how that works. So while you're sitting there, you write these down and that's how you begin. So you're organizing them and linking them together. So you see, you're building a concept map of keywords and phrases so that when you actually plug it into PubMed, and I'll show you how to do that quickly, or Google Scholar, I already go from hundreds and thousands and millions of articles down to at least a manageable amount. Okay, so let's see how we put that together. Okay, so it can be challenging. That's how you do your search. So as we were talking, hopefully you're writing your research idea and your keywords. How far back do you go? It is always important to look at current literature. Because remember, especially when you're doing a laboratory work or experimental work, sorry, there's advancements are quite fast. So as a result of that, no more than 2 to 3 years old. However, that does depend on what faculty and what department. In some cases, you are going to have to go back to the beginning, to the 1960s or the 80s or the 2000s to look at the projection or the progression, sorry, of a particular disease outcome, because sometimes that also helps in your literature review. But the idea, start at 2-3 years, okay, and let the good studies find you. What does that mean? High citations. Okay, high citations, those are the good studies that find you. And again, remember, as I mentioned, if you're doing clinical research, you have to look at the older ones. Okay, and the reason for that, if you're looking, for example, here, let's look at TB. Before, when you used to test for tuberculosis, they used to do the skin test. But now, as they progressed, we looked at MRI scanning. So you need to compare older technology to newer technology to compare how they differ from each other. So that's where you will have to go back to the 80s or the 90s or the early 2000s. But as a rule of thumb, as you're starting out as a student, 2 to 3 years is enough. Okay, find large number of articles that have abstracts that are relevant to your study. Remember, an abstract will tell you everything that you need to know. It gives you a brief summary. You use those to guide you to find your article, and we'll do an example. Let's see if there's any. Okay. Okay, so we're going to go back, keywords, and we'll get to this, hopefully. Okay, so before, okay, let me stop sharing for a second. Get out of this. Yeah, of course, my screen decides to freeze. It's live. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. My screen froze. So let me share again. Okay, share my screen and let's move to Mozilla. Okay, I will get to first and foremost. Okay, remember I said, and I said this in academic writing, if you go through the recording or the slides, before you start anything, you must start with planning. This is where we're at. We need to plan. It's very hard to just jump right in. You will get overwhelmed. So when you are starting out, gather your information, gather the software that you need, gather everything that you need. So the first thing is obviously Microsoft Word, the entire Microsoft package. For some students that still don't have it, I think 2 students emailing me about this. You contact the ICS, you can go there, check your laptop in. I think they do send you a Google Drive link sometimes, it just depends. And then they will give you the full Microsoft package. So now you start with Microsoft Word. By now, I think all of us should have that. The second thing to do when you're writing, and a lot of students are still doing manual referencing. We have moved past that. There's absolutely no need to be doing manual referencing anymore. There is software that does it exactly how you want it. If your supervisor says, I want the AMA style, it will automatically do your entire thesis for you. If he says he wants the Harvard system, I know depending on certain fields, they do a particular style, it will do it like that. If you are in social work, there's a particular clinical psychology way in which we reference, it will automatically do it for you. So the first place to start, remember, is software. So you go to the library website, okay, and you go down to EndNote, you read up, and you click on the installation guide. So if you click on this, I'm not going to do all that. It will take you to a Google Drive and will allow you to download. It's a free software that's available that university has paid for, which will allow you to have the software incorporated into your Word. So if you open a Word document, okay, so you download that, that's where you start. Okay. So my PC keeps up. Okay, so if I look, I hope everyone can still see my screen. If you look over there, it says EndNote. And what this does is, as I'm writing, my reference library is already there of the articles that I'm now going to search for. So you see how it's systematic, putting all the story together. It's already there. So as I'm writing, I don't need to go back to Google and find the article. I've written down notes. I know which articles are important because remember, every field has your top guns, the people that have been in the field long. So I have those articles. I just insert them as I go along. If I submit this draft to my supervisor and he's like, I don't like this style of referencing, change it to this. I click on EndNote, it does it for me. I'm not going to go in depth with this because the library does this for you. Okay, so that's the first place we start. We download software, Word, we're writing, and that. Then the second thing is I'm starting to obviously collect my papers. So if you go back to the little exercise we did, a research idea, a research topic that I was given, I break down that topic into keywords. That means I have inclusion and exclusion criteria. I can't look at everything. I'm looking at cancer, lung cancer. I can't look at smokers and asbestos exposure. That is just way too much. I pick one, smoking. I can't look at the whole world. I look at smoking in South Africa. If I want to even go, I live in Cape Town, I'm studying in Cape Town, I want funding in the Western Cape, I look at smoking habits in the Western Cape. Do you see what I mean? You come down with keywords which make it much easier for you. So that's the first, we've got all the information. The second thing is, there's a website known as, one of them is Connected Papers. There are others that do it as well. It allows you to create a mind map of all the articles that you need, and you can then embed it with PubMed. So it's, what was the research idea? Goals, nano articles. Okay. Automatically will put it for you. Okay. So now I'm looking at surface chemistry. What did I say? I said, I don't want all of this. I want to look at particular cancer. Remember I mentioned cancer. So gold nanoparticles, let's just go with photothermal. I think I mentioned colorectal. Okay, so now that's that's my supervisor, Jeremy, whoever is my supervisor. He is doing gold nanoparticles, cancer therapy. That's the lab I belong to. That's what I'm doing. Automatically, I can already see this. If I bring it out, if you play around, sorry, let's just do this. And remember, I said we must go. It's not, my thing is freezing a bit. Automatically, I can see where my article is. Okay, you're supposed to actually, I think my thing is freezing. You're supposed to be able to drag this See, it's updating 12%. I'm just going to quickly do this. So what it does is you're able to drag it. And remember, I said you go 2 to 3 years. If you go 2 to 3 years, automatically all these articles will disappear. It kind of looks cool, but you know, internet. It will disappear and you'll come down to maybe 20 articles. And as a student myself, I mean, submitting my PhD, I think that's the quickest way. If I gather 20 articles about cancer therapy and gold nanoparticles, out of those 20, I come down from 20 to 10. And those are the 10 that will form my skeleton for my literature review. Like I said, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. Okay, so you can look at this in your own particular time. There we go, show updated graph. So I'm seeing, if I move it around, I'm able to see where my article from my supervisor fits into the big world out there. And then you obviously play around with it and so on and so forth. So this helps, especially if you're conceptual, it helps put it. And why do I go? Because remember, high citations. You always go for high citations because high referencing, high citations, top guns in the field. If you're in a particular field, you will figure out who the top people are globally in the field because they're the highest publishers in the field. So this helps put it together. Like I said, if you drag this, it will bring it down from these hundreds down to at least 10 or 20 for you. So now I begin searching. So let's go back to the presentation for the example. I'm just going to make this big enough. I'm not going to, okay, I think we can see this. Okay, where was I? Okay, so advanced searches. So one of the things you're going to use, and I find it's the easiest, is to use PubMed. Okay, so if you go to PubMed, this is what it looks like. So I don't want to search just PubMed because if I enter cancer, let's just enter cancer and see what happens. Who has the time? Like really, who has the time? And in addition to that, everyone gets, you'll get overwhelmed. So what you do is you go to advanced searches. And this is where, so you use what are known as Boolean phrases. They make it much easier for you. So this add index here, add, or, these are known as Boolean phrases. I think pronunciation is, I don't know. But you use this and this will guide you. So remember what I was trying to explain to you guys? Similar concept. So let's go back. Let's close everything. Let's go to an article dealing with ostrich. So let's put in ostrich. Because now I'm in there, in zoology. So I want to look at that, 1,500 results. Okay, so that automatically does it for you. So then if I go to PubMed, I've looked at articles dealing with ostrich because my supervisor just said, look, you'll be working on ostriches. Supervisors do that on the fly. You WhatsApp them, Prof, I don't have a research topic. What do you think? Ostriches, I think we should look at that. I have funding. Go. That's it. That's what you get. So where do you start? Like, what about ostriches? Again, remember I said publish research 2 to 3 years. So we go back. Let's go to 2020. 1,588 comes down to 126 results. That's manageable because then from there, I can then continue. Do you see how it becomes easier for you when you use advanced searches? So let's go to another example. Your supervisor has decided, I want you to write a review because that's what you'll be doing. You'll be looking at mutations in the FOXP2 gene that will then affect speech development disorder because you belong to a oral therapy lab. So how do I do this? Again, there's no need to search each one. And a lot of students do this. They search FOXP mutations and speech development plus. It makes it much harder for you. So you go to advanced again. Okay, mutations. I want to see it. Remember, I said summary of the findings. So summary of the findings means I'm interested in the title and the abstract. So you go down, text word, we can do mutations. So I want to look at all mutations. You add it. What is the other thing? FOXP2. It's a particular gene because I'm going to be doing that. But I'm not interested in the text because remember, it's a gene will come up in many texts. I want it in my title because that's the lab I belong to. The lab I belong to looks at a FOXP2. So I look at the title. Okay. And what is the other thing that we're going to be doing? Speech development disorder. So then again, that's all I'm interested in. You add it. So those are the things I mean. Mutations generally, so in any way in the article, but FOXP2 gene and speech development. Search that, no results were found. And that sometimes happens because in the title, there might not be a particular thing. That does happen. So what you do is You go back to the search. You go to all fields, Fox P2, add, and do speech development. Okay, add that, and we search. 177, and as I mentioned, where do we start? We start with recent articles. So I just exclude all of those. I go to 2019. 30, there we go. My supervisor told me I'm looking at the Fox P2 in autism and speech, and then I go there. A good place to start are review articles, because remember, review articles look at all what's done already. So I go here. I'm interested in statistics. I go for review. 6. There are my 6 articles. Do you see how easy it becomes? So let's go again, a couple of other examples. So now this is where it gets kind of tricky. Articles authored by T. Hubbard. Okay. Do I put Hubbard T or T. Hubbard? What do you guys think? You can just unmute. What do you think? Do I put Hubbard T or T. Hubbard? Anyone want to take a shot? There's no wrong answers. We're here to learn. What do you think? Will it be T. Hubbard like that or Hubbard T?
Hubbard T.
Yeah. Okay, exactly that. And the reason for that is if you go to any article, thank you. If you go to any article, okay. Sorry, let's go. If you go T. Hubbard and search, nothing will come up. And the reason for that, if you look at any article, it's always the surname first, and then, so you put a comma and the initials, and then it comes up. And that's because even in the Harvard system of referencing, that is how we reference. So then again, you do the same concept. You will come from 32 results down to the article that you want. Okay, an article from me published in 2018 on coronaviruses. You can do that in your own time. Articles authored. This is where it gets a bit interesting. So let's do that one. An article by that person, 2018 on coronaviruses. How do I get that article? Because now I'm interested in finding the exact article and I don't want to reference it. I go to, I don't want to find it over a whole lot of information. I go to all fields. I go to author. Just go to general author, actually, because we all work in teams. We go to, okay. Add, what was it? I only want the articles from 2018. So I go to date of completion of the article, 2018 articles only. And sometimes you'll find when you speak to your supervisor, they'll be like, you know what? I was at a conference in 2018 and somebody published something on something. His name was John Smith. So what am I going to do? And he published on Fox P2 Gene. This is how you do it. John Smith, author, 2018, because that was the year that the supervisor remembered the article. Fox P2 Gene is the title. You add that and on coronaviruses. So we're going to go to title. Title and abstract, because that's all we care about. So we're going to go to your title and, oh, am I blind? Am I not seeing this? There we go. Title, coronaviruses. Oops. Add, search, it brings up the article for you. So in less than, what was that, 30 seconds, I found the article. And then if your supervisor says, this is the article that you're going to use, this is the article that you're going to use in relation to your particular field. So you see how it becomes so much easier for you to go from, if you start with a research idea, for you to go from a research idea with keywords from thousands of articles to 30 or 20. And in those 30 or 20, you will find, I guaranteed, at least 10 that are trying to do that have already done what you're trying to do. Maybe slightly differently if you have a novel approach or a novel compound or something like that, but they have done it. So you see that already forms a skeleton. You print those and that's how you start your first draft. So let's get back to this. We can do the others in your own time. Okay. I'll get to citations quickly. I'll get to the reading. Let's just go to there. That's how you then start. I identified my research question. I then looked at my research style. So remember, I decided I'm doing a chronological, a thematic one, a meta-analysis. I then used PubMed, the way I just showed you, to get the literature. So I searched, I found references. So I found 10 articles, and then I critically analyzed those 10. And by looking at the 10 or 20 articles, I analyzed them, and then I could actually link those 10 link them to my research context, and by doing that, begin writing. And then from those 10, I move to 20, 30, 40, because remember, those 10 will have combined easy 200 to 1,000 references, and that automatically will help guide me. So you see, that is the steps of producing a good literature review that can be published and a good chapter 1. So before you start writing, let's go back. 10% is your introduction and conclusion, so put that there. Plan. Again, planning. Key aspects, what do I want to speak about? I mean, I've guided you through the process. Decide, because you need to have a exclusion criteria, and you choose. And then you start searching. So if you go back to PubMed, okay, let's go to, which one was this? This was the one. Okay, so this was the one. Remember, it initially was just all of them. So initially, when I searched the FOXP2 gene and speech development in autism or neurodegeneration, 177. But as I mentioned, I don't want to sit with 177 articles. I want to look at the latest articles. So I come down to 2019 to 2022. 30 articles is manageable. Okay, so from this, I then want to look at reviews. So I could look at all the reviews that are out there. That brings me down to 6 in autism. And that is what I'm actually going to be doing. I'm going to be looking at the upregulation of the FOXP2 gene and how it affects your speech development and your language in autistic patients. There we go, 6 articles. I download all 6 articles, print them if you have to, and I make notes. Automatically in a day, I've gone from, I'm doing some random gene that I don't even know. I now understand what I'm doing. Do you see? If you read even 3 of these articles, you've already gathered 200 references for yourself, because remember, they're the latest references, 200 references, and you already understand what your research is about. And from this, you can then develop your objectives by looking at their objectives and develop your ideas. Do you see how you put it all together? So that is how you actually then start writing your first draft. I have an outline. So from those articles that I read, I got ideas. I got ideas on my headings. I got ideas on my subheadings. So I looked at them, I wrote my thoughts down, and then I begin. So if my literature review is 1 page, how am I going to get this draft out to my supervisor so I can actually start writing and not be anxious? You wing it. That's the simplest thing when you're going to do it. It applies to many things. You wing it. First time, you wing it. So if you have a page, first paragraph technically is my introduction. So that's a broad outline of the research problem. In this case, the example I did, autism, speech development. That is the context. That's the background. What is autism about? The stigmas attached to it. How does it affect your development? So on and so forth. That's broad. I then come narrow down in my second or third paragraph. Of course, a literature review is about 20 to 120 pages, depends on your supervisor, your thesis, and so on. So obviously, again, put it in that context according to subheadings. Second and third paragraph, key points. I'm looking at the particular research, those 6 articles published in journals, review articles. I've critically reviewed them. I'm comparing those 6 to each other. Obviously, in your actual literature review, you will have about 50 articles, but again, it's understanding concepts. So then I'm comparing. I'm looking at autism. I'm looking at the genes that are involved. I'm looking at neurodegeneration. If you have a defective FOXP2 gene, you're more likely to be higher on the autism spectrum, so on and so forth. Understanding. So that's where reading skills. And then my 4th paragraph, you're narrowing it down even further. The FOXP2 gene is responsible for this particular pathway. This particular pathway results in this particular neurons being activated, and that's. However, no one has ever looked at another pathway that's also involved in outcome for speech development. That's a gap. I can look at that pathway. Do you see how you're putting it all systematically together? Last paragraph, so in the case of a 20 to 120 page review, the last pages is your conclusion. What is my research about? How am I going to contribute to the knowledge? And where my research questions, aims, and objectives are. So you see how you put it all together. You started with 1,000 articles, you come down to 30 or 6, you put those together to understand, and you start formulating a draft. And that's how you actually get that. And that draft is something that you're going to keep going back to and building on. It is easier for you to write nonsense in a draft and go back and edit than actually start writing, because that's always the problem, starting. That's our biggest problem, starting and being consistent. So this is how you actually start your first draft. So as I mentioned, this is how you start, you wing your first draft. But the key thing to remember, and this is why I mentioned, there's no need, and this is where students also get it wrong. You start writing, you have your draft and so on and so forth. You write this 20, 30, 40 pages of a literature review and you manually reference it. Whereas if you started writing using EndNote or Mendeley, your references are already there. They're already proper. They're already double checked. They're in the correct format. So it makes it much easier because you don't have to go back. And the beauty of using EndNote is that if you click on the reference in text, automatically will take you to the website where the reference is. So you see, it becomes so much easier, click of a button. So it does, the software does help you. But the key thing to remember, and this is where students, even though you're using a particular software tool, the key thing to understand, and this becomes very important for literature review, is that you must make sure that you reference and you have the correct citation. What does that mean? So if you go to an article, right? And I don't want to read this whole article. Let's see. Oh, gosh. So we go to an article and you'll see if you read articles now. Okay. This is not where I want it to be. Just stop this quickly. I didn't want to purchase the article. Let's go to something that doesn't have to be purchased. So if you go to a particular article, you'll see there'll be a whole lot of citations. And what we do, and everyone does it, but it's actually, you need to double check it, okay? Is that when you look at the particular article, so let me go back to sharing. Oh, yeah, of course my screen decides it's going to. Okay, there we go. So here's an article, right? Again, Fox P2, speech. If you look at the article, right, it's using the number system instead of the Harvard system, right? So it's using that. So now I read the sentence. After we worked 2001, we discovered a gene, FOXP2, identifying a mutation that disrupts this gene and causes the disorder. Okay, so FOXP2, a mutation in that causes speech development. I take this and I paraphrase it. Isn't that what we do? We copy and paste and we paraphrase. And automatically we copy this reference. We go to 3, and this is what we do as students. We go to 3 and we copy this reference and we put it in our EndNote or into our manual reference. The problem with that is, remember, they reference it according to what they were going to say. You're referencing it according to something you're also trying to say, but it doesn't fall exactly under your research. Do you get what I mean? So you have to go back, you have to actually go to this article in PubMed and double check the article to make sure that what they were speaking about applies, because they could be speaking about speech, yes, but it's not the main topic. The main topic could be neurodegeneration. If you're an occupational therapy master student that's focusing on speech, you do not need to focus on neurodegeneration because you're focusing on language. Do you see what I mean? So that's something, again, to be careful with sometimes when you're doing your citations, and why we speak about the importance of correct citations. You need to check that. Another thing is figures and tables. Remember, there's in-text citations. I'm not going to go through this because you can read this. It's just there to guide you when you get started with the literature review. This is in there because the library does this. You need to make sure that you reference all source material. Okay, so how do I look at an article? Remember, I mentioned the Peacock method. First and foremost, I'm interested in the title and the abstract. And in some cases, if you're lucky enough, the table of contents. So this already tells me, can you see, if you look at the table of contents, I get headings. So I get ideas, I get subheadings that I can then use to build my literature review. And remember, each subheading deals with a particular topic that's inclusive of my particular review. So this is how you build. You look at reviews that are out there, those 6, for example, look at those subheadings in those 6 articles, and I can guarantee you will get 12 subheadings related to your research, or 24, and from there start building your literature review. And then you have figures that you might want, so you can copy those over. And you're looking at future work. And by looking at future work, you also get ideas of novelty. So maybe you were going to look at a pathway. You were really interested in looking at a particular pathway. It's already been done before. But in their future works, they mentioned a pathway that they're going to be looking at, but you know there's a different type of way of looking at that pathway. Automatically, there's your objective. Do you see what I mean? So it's, again, as I mentioned, critical appraisal, strategic planning, and systematic approach. So those are the things that are very, very important when you're going to, and then you have a bit of a reference list. You could take some of those references. If you do use this article, you use those references to build your reference list. So that's the steps. Okay, again, the common mistakes about writing a review, you can read this up. I think it boils down to academic writing, so there's no need for me to read this from the slide. if you're writing a literature review or you're starting to write your literature review, I advise you to print these three actually. This slide, and literature review checklist. So when you write your literature review in your draft stage, in your planning stage, in your first, second, third, you look at this. Do I have structure? Is there cohesiveness? Have I added too much data? Because remember that fluff, that's one thing I speak about. Don't add too much fluff. Because if you write about a particular topic, I can guarantee you could write 200, 300, and it still won't cover that entire topic, because that's how intricate data analysis is and research. So you must make sure that it's not too much information, but also not too little. So there mustn't be jumps in logic, there must be a flow. Okay? And you must understand how your study, clear objectives, you're identifying a gap, and this is why we submit a proposal. A proposal says, I've identified a gap by my literature review process. This is how I'm going to fit into the gap, and this is why I'm proposing. This is what I'm proposing to do. Do you see? And they become very important, not just for master's level, they become very important for PhD level, they become very important for your NRF applications, your CSIR, because you have to submit a proposal. This is what is out there. This is how my study is going to contribute. This is why you should give me money. Grant applications, all those concepts are important. And this is why it becomes very, very important for proposal writing. And again, all of this you can read, PubMed, so on and so forth. And then your review checklist. So as I've written my literature review, if you're second year, third year master's about to submit, look at this checklist and see how it actually correlates to what you're trying to do, and see if you've answered these particular questions. Okay, so that was a lot. It's a lot of information, but as I mentioned, the take home is critical appraisal. Don't reinvent the wheel. 10, 12 articles, print them, make notes on them, and from there you gather your ideas, and then you start building. So systematically build your literature review, build your thesis and your methodology. If you build your literature review well, that becomes your proposal, that becomes your chapter 1. It's easier to edit. Okay, so the next workshop, obviously, now that you've gathered literature, you understand how to review literature, you understand concepts and ideas out there, you have to then develop a research proposal. And as I mentioned, research proposals are not just for Senate, because we have the mentality as students. I want to get this done to move to the next step. Research proposals are for funding. A lot of students, and we will be having a workshop on funding applications, a lot of students miss funding opportunities because they didn't understand how to submit a proper abstract, a proper research proposal according to the word count, and clear aims and objectives of why they should be given the bursary. So that is why you have to get comfortable with developing a research proposal. So that will be the next workshop in the series. So feel free to register for that via your student portal. Okay, for those of you who are like second or third will begin writing, remember that the DPGS does offer postgraduate coaching. So you need to complete the JOT form. It is on our DPGS in Canvas site. You complete that and you get assigned a writing coach. Remember, coaches don't rewrite for you. They don't edit, they guide you. They guide you on your ideas. So same thing we did in this workshop. It's an overview guidance of what you're supposed to do. That's what your coach will do. And then look at your writing and help fix up your logical flow of information to make sure that there's cohesion in your writing. Okay, thank you for your time. I've mentioned this before. So before everyone leaves, please, can you please copy the link of the workshop evaluation? Okay, it will open up automatically to review this entire workshop. Can I just advise students to at least just take like, I'm gonna stop sharing. There we go. Sorry, I need to share the link quickly. About that. Yeah. So please can you copy the link? I'm gonna send it to you guys, copy the link. I'm gonna put it in the chat box actually. And you can just take 2 minutes before you leave the workshop, just to quickly fill out the evaluation. Remember, I've mentioned this before, a system only works if there's buy-in, and we can only fix and actually allocate certain workshops for students in particular departments if we understand your needs, and can only understand your needs if we are evaluated. So thank you for your time. So before you go, please do that. I'll put it in the chat box, and feel free to drop me an email if you have any questions. So yeah, stop sharing. Let me just put it in the chat box. Okay, so I've put the evaluation. So if I could kindly ask the students copy this and open it either in Word, I mean, not in Word, in Mozilla or what is the other one? Chrome and just quickly fill out the evaluation so that I can actually have evaluations of today's workshop, just to understand the next workshops or many other workshops that we're going to have, like what do you guys need and stuff. So yeah, thank you so much. Are there any questions? How far is everyone?